May your love of the form culminate in the love of the formless. Charan Singh. Why I meditate. Recently, there was an intense discussion on spiritual matters on Brion Hines' widely read blog, The Church of the Churchless, and an Indian gentleman wrote to me via email providing a link to it, primarily because there was a question about why I still meditate given my skeptical outlook on most things religious. He too was curious and wanted to know more about my daily practice and my reasoning behind it. The following is my response. Everyone I know who is brought up in a strict Catholic tradition, going to church, attending parochial schools, receiving communion and confirmation, is deeply infected by its theological ideas, even if later they contravene them in varying ways. I say this precisely because from a very early age I suffered from a severe longing for something transcendent, what in German is known as Sehnsucht, properly defined as thoughts and feelings about all facets of life that are unfinished or imperfect, paired with a yearning for ideal alternative experiences. It has been referred to as life's longings, or an individual's search for happiness while coping with the reality of unattainable wishes. I suspect that almost all human beings have at one time or another felt a sense of longing that couldn't be resolved by what the world has on offer. In any case, I remember very early on feeling a profound absence, even though I was surrounded by 3 loving siblings and a coterie of good childhood friends. The problem with Catholicism was that it didn't offer me an experiential solution to my difficulties, but on the whole only exacerbated it with its overriding emphasis on sin, suffering, and ritualism, not to mention an unbending dogmatism concerning unknowable mysteries, such as the resurrection of Christ and the virginity of his mother. Thus, it is not surprising that I was open to alternative views while still very young. Reflecting back now, I can vividly recall first practicing yoga when I was 10 years old. I was undoubtedly a product of my age, or perhaps of what was on television, since I was mesmerized by Richard Hittleman's popular show, Yoga for Health, which reportedly debuted on local television in Los Angeles, California in 1961. I used to visit weekly the North Hollywood Public Library that had a few books on yoga. And from those few rudimentary texts, I started practicing pranayama, breath control, asanas, body postures, and mudras, hand positions. In the midst of these self-taught exercises, I happened to watch the Les Crane television show with my mother. I think it was in the afternoon, and Mr. Crane was interviewing Maharishi Mahesh Yogi for nearly an hour, and my mom and I were deeply moved by it. I particularly liked the guru's emphasis on stilling the mind. I mention this because although I was not personally drawn to the Maharishi, the idea of meditation struck a chord with me. At this tender age of 11 years old, I also chanced upon Paramahansa Yogananda's famous book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I was enthralled with it and couldn't put the book down, reading it very carefully each day. I think this particular book must have been the tipping point, as it has been a touchstone for many people worldwide, including Steve Jobs, who allegedly had it on his own personal iPad and reread it yearly. Yogananda's tale is a fantastic one, and not always a believable one. But being indoctrinated within Catholicism and its innumerable miraculous stories concerning saints and the like, I was overly ripe for the offering. I coupled my Indian philosophical reading with biographies of Catholic saints and mystics. I was particularly enamored with St. John Bosco, who had visions of the Virgin Mary. In one story, which I now think must be part of some questionable hagiographical rendition, St. John Bosco went to church and offered his lunch, or was it an apple, to a statue of the Virgin Mary, and it came alive and took it. For some strange reason, this appealed to me, and I used to go to our St. Charles Church, which also offered the elementary school I attended, and very intently offered my lunch to the statue of the Virgin Mary. When that didn't work, I tried offering it to the statue of St. Joseph. Again, to no avail. Thankfully, this miracle-seeking on my part was short-lived, and I dived more deeply into my yogic studies and practice. I also branched out and started reading about the life of Buddha. One night, I was so taken by Siddhartha's firm resolution to sit under the Bodhi tree until he reached enlightenment that I got out of bed, it was a school night of course, and I crossed my legs and sat on the floor and vowed not to get up until I too received illumination. Of course, given my monkey mind, I think it took all of but 10 minutes for me to contemplate getting some cereal and watching some television instead. Although I was quite athletically inclined, in 6th grade I started hanging out with a different group of friends who were experimenting with drugs. We started taking these small white pills during recess called bennies, which I later learned was a street term for benzedrine, which was a racemic mixture of amphetamine, and which got me and my comrades super energetic. At recess, I would pop 1 or 2 so I could play pickup basketball better, particularly when trying to beat my good friend Ed Grady for his hot lunch, which his mother invariably brought to him each day around noon. Then, one night while I was staying with another friend, redacted for his protection, at his home in the hills of Studio City, his brother had us smoke some pot he had with him. I didn't get high that night, since I was suffering from a Clinton-esque moment where I couldn't seem to inhale the smoke long enough to get a buzz. A few days later, I got the hang of it, and got quite intoxicated. So high, in fact, that during this very first trip, everything turned unexpectedly psychedelic. I felt I was exported into a different world, quite parallel to the one I knew, and it was exceptionally frightening. Time stood still, and all the people around me shrunk down as if cued by an accordion into midgets. This experience lasted for hours, and I was quite distraught. Later, I learned that the pot had been laced with opium. The peer pressure was such, or more accurately, my perception of it, that I continued for nearly 6 or 7 months experimenting with pot, bennies, and occasionally some strong hashish, usually laced with opium. My experiences, outside of the ones with bennies, which were non-hallucinogenic, were invariably anxiety-inducing and never very pleasant. I had one particularly hellish experience when I smoked some hashish, again laced with opium, in 7th grade, right before school started. I was sitting in class and everything swirled around me as if I had entered a time portal, where everyone kept shrinking in size, and moments would seem to last for an eternity. I wanted to go to the school nurse and tell her about it to get some help, but I knew that if I did, I would get kicked out and my mom and dad would never forgive me. So I hung on, and it took days for me to drop down to a relatively normal state of consciousness. Shortly thereafter, at the end of my 7th grade term, I stopped cold turkey and didn't take any more drugs, not even in high school or college or graduate school. I was, as the cliché goes, scared straight. Yet these experiences, preliminary and as immature as they were, only intensified an abiding loneliness in me and pushed me further to find some transcendent solution to my existential dilemma. I became an obsessive reader of all things Eastern. At the age of 15, I had a remarkable experience of speaking in tongues when I attended a charismatic mass at Loyola University near Manhattan Beach that convinced me that higher states of consciousness were possible without ingesting drugs. As my quest intensified, I eventually turned vegetarian at the age of 16 and consciously looked for a spiritual guide who could instruct me further on the inner journey. Although I met a number of teachers, including the infamous Father Yod and Yogi Bhajan among others, I developed a peculiar standard to which to appraise any potential master. I ruminated to myself that he must be a vegetarian and follow a path of ahimsa, or nonviolence. He must not charge any money whatsoever for instruction and not make any absolute claims about his own inner attainment. And finally, and I am fairly sure that the Sikh influence here, though not conscious, was operative. The teacher should have an uncut hair and beard. To be sure, this very guru template was influenced by what I was reading and what I was experiencing, and says much about how persuasively our own cultural upbringing flavors our inner sojourns, contrary to what we may mistakenly believe to be a pure and virginal quest for the absolute. After years of seeking, I came upon my eventual teacher, Charan Singh of Radha Swami Satsang Bias, when I was 17 years old. The story behind this is a long and intimate one that is best left retold at another time. I will simply say that it forever changed my outlook and made me focus my efforts in a quite specific way. Before learning of Charan Singh and his meditational method, I had practiced Kundalini Yoga for a year and was partial to the philosophical outlook of Ramana Maharishi and Advaita Vedanta. Charan Singh, who traced his lineage from his grandfather and guru, Sawan Singh, back to Jaimal Singh and Shiv Dayal Singh, and earlier versions of Sant Mat, taught a streamlined version of Surat Shabda Yoga. It offered a threefold method of concentration which included repeating a 5-word mantra to focusing one's attention and sight on inner light and listening to a hidden sound or melody within. This latter aspect, sound current or shabda, from which the practice derives its distinctive name, seemed odd to me when I first learned about it. Given my predilection for jnana yoga as espoused by Ramana Maharishi, specifically his most well-known book, Talks with Sri Ramana Maharishi, I thought the idea of listening to some inner music to become enlightened sounded, and the pun here is not intentional, silly at best. But I was so enamored by Charan Singh and how he conducted himself that I had no hesitation in practicing such a technique. Although Charan Singh wouldn't initiate me right away, even though I pleaded my case each month off and on for years, he made me wait 5 years until I was 22 years of age, I started doing Shabda Yoga from what I learned from certain Radha Swami books. Almost immediately, I saw how effective it was, and became convinced it was a viable way to still the mind and explore the end source of one's own consciousness. There is much I can write about my eventual tutelage under Charan Singh and my many travels to India, where I met with a large number of Shabda Yoga masters and the like, including, most impressively, my deep and abiding connection with Baba Fakir Chand. But I wish to narrow the focus now to the question underlying the purpose of this essay: why do I meditate? And additionally, why do I practice Shabda Yoga and not some other pathway? There are many answers to that query, and I will try to elucidate some of them. But perhaps the best response, and one which echoes Alan Watts's own sentiment on the matter, is the simplest one. I enjoy it. I like sitting quietly for long periods of time, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, daily, and resting in my own being without being distracted by an outside world that consistently clamors for my divided attention. There is something innately blissful in reposing within one's self and experiencing the quietude of one's own mind undoing its ceaseless machinations. There are, I would imagine, moments in everyone's life, even if fleeting, where one fully awakens to the present moment and the overwhelming wonder of it all, and feels a communion with all that arises. I remember once when I was surfing for nearly 8 straight hours at Coho at the Bixby Ranch below Point Conception, and the waves were so good that I couldn't leave the water even though I was thirsty and hungry. I was drunk on Neptune energy, so much so that when I finally reached the shore just after sunset, I couldn't move, and sat on the sand supremely content and serene, and felt like I was going to melt with all that I could see, hear, touch, feel, and smell. This state of ecstasy felt timeless, despite only lasting some 10 or so minutes, until hyperthermia and exhaustion overtook my chilling body. I bring this up because meditation for me is akin to why I surf. I have surfed almost my entire life, and I derive the same happy giddiness from it now that I did when I was 10 years old and riding inflatable rafts with my longtime friend Pat Donahue at Sorrento Grill in Santa Monica, California. Why? Because whenever I am in the water, I have to be totally present to what is happening. Whether it is an incoming rogue wave, a sweeping riptide, a school of curious dolphins, a stray seal, stealthy stingrays, or the joy of being inside a vacuuming tube collapsing all around my hydrofoiling body. The writer for The New Yorker, William Finnegan, in his meandering but engaging book, Barbarian Days, captured this feeling well when in a recent article published in The Concourse, he recalls how Kelly Slater, the most celebrated surfer in the modern era, remarked when asked by an interviewer how he felt after winning another world title and $100,000 at Pipeline in Hawaii, exclaimed, "I'd give it back to have another half hour with two guys out there." To which Finnegan commented, "He's dead serious." Happiness, in one insightful definition, is when we are awake to a present moment that we want to fully be in. The glitch, of course, is that there are far too many times in which we don't want to be there, where we reflect more about our past or fantasize about some future possibility. Meditation is quite simply allowing consciousness to be present and allowing it to envelop upon itself. I have noticed that continued practice is a privilege and not a discipline, even though at first it may appear like that. I think Gerald Edelman, the distinguished Nobel Prize winner and controversial pioneer in consciousness studies, captures the essence of why meditation works by his twofold understanding of awareness. Human beings, unlike almost all other animals, are too often trapped within their own dissociative states, and as such are caught within a web of virtual simulations. While this second-nature capacity evolved as a great advantage to Homo sapiens, simulating before acting is advantageous in a Hunger Games-like world, just as insourcing outcomes before outsourcing them in a real world tends to keep one alive. It also comes with a very heavy price. We are prone to imprison ourselves in virtual reflections and projections, and not witness how these manifestations arise from our own consciousness as such. Meditation is a process to trace the source from which all such manifestations arise, similar to being in an ocean and understanding how and why waves arise upon its surface, without forgetting that they too are part and parcel of the sea. We are, lest we forget, part of all that arises, and diving deep into that ocean of being allows a never-ending journey into the mystery of what it is to be alive and conscious. As for myself, I have noticed that Shabda Yoga practice is a very practical method of focusing the mind back to its source. It does this by giving one's attention a threefold excuse to sit quietly and not wander outside. First, by repeating a word or words over and over again, it acts as a sort of neurological koan, paradoxically restraining the rational mind from generating narrative sequences. Second, by contemplating at one point or center and being attentive to whatever arises, light, darkness, forms, but not being anxious about such, calms one's entire nervous system to such a degree that the body literally starts to enjoy its own energy without having to expend it needlessly. And third, listening to an apparently unbreakable radiance or melody enlivens one within an unexplored realm. I don't meditate with an end goal, or with some underlying desire for a specific enlightened state mentioned in some ancient holy book, or postulated by a revered sage. I meditate just like I surf, for the bliss of the ride. Where it will eventually take me is not dissimilar to where life takes us, to the unexpected and to the unexplored. In other words, it is the means of meditation and not some desired end that is fulfilling. I have noticed that if I get anxious about some result, or when I feel a rush as of entering a time and space portal to a new world, I lose my own balance by clutching. Letting go, surrendering to our own consciousness, and not succumbing to the endless stream of virtual simulations, which our brains are evolutionarily designed to do, is to apprehend the meta-program and experience why it emerged. Harjit Singh Sandhu, in his foreword to Baba Fakir Chand's brilliant book, Jivan Mukti, explains the process of Surat Shabda Yoga meditation well when he writes, "In meditation, light and sound are natural manifestations of the self." Maharaj, Fakir Chand, warns us not to stop or get entangled in inner phenomena. The virtual simulator? Instead, he guides us to direct our attention to the silent observer or witness of light and sound. In this manner, one is liberated from all manifestations, physical, mental, and spiritual, and what remains is beyond description. It is what it is. Far too often, meditation practice gets intertwined with a specific path or theological doctrine, such that it becomes a pathway to benefit the outward religion or guru, since the disciple mistakenly believes that without either, he or she could not uncover the mystery of their own being. This is why Ramana Maharshi's quote concerning ultimate realization is so liberating when he writes, "It is false to speak of realization. What is there to realize? The real is as it is always. We are not creating anything new or achieving something which we did not have before. The illustration given in books is this. We dig a well and create a huge pit. The space in the pit, or well, has not been created by us. We have just removed the earth which was filling the space there. The space was there then and is also there now. Similarly, we have simply to throw out all the age-long samskaras, innate tendencies, which are inside us. When all of them have been given up, the self will shine alone." It should also be admitted, however, that meditation can also serve as a scientific expedition, not dissimilar to how one might climb Mount Everest for the first time or voyage to an uncharted island in the Pacific. For instance, Shabda Yoga claims that it can essentially induce a conscious near-death experience and provide one with a glimpse of what it is like to leave one's body and enter into ever-increasing lucid states of awareness. This is a bold claim and one that needs verification, even if the would-be meditator may ultimately arrive at a different interpretation of why such experiences arise. However, for such a hypothesis to be tested, one does need to actually engage in the practice and at least observe such inward phenomena. It is too easy to dismiss the mystical with cheap reductionism, such as, "It is all brain hallucinations," especially when even our own waking state is itself the product of a complex neuronal symphony. Hence, there is a pioneering aspect to meditation that can, at times, be quite exhilarating. In a letter to one of his disciples, Jagat Singh, a well-regarded master within the Radhaswami B.S. tradition, both commends and slightly reprimands him about his experiences when he explains, "The experience you had during these so-called bhajanless days, that is, brilliant light surrounded by twinkling lights, was real and correct and was due to your attention being subconsciously at the eye center. It was perfectly natural for the attention to be riveted on the central white light as also the suction. The nearer you draw to this light, the greater will be the suction, for you have to pierce and cross it. You did miss something there, for you should not, my emphasis, have battled against this suction. You should have remained relaxed and allowed yourself to be drawn up." Jagat Singh's advice is a procedural one and offers a tantalizing clue about how to proceed when in such an exalted state of awareness. This reminds of when I was looking for surf on the backside of Catalina Island on my boat, and I would ask residents their advice about when and where to find good waves. I listened to one seasoned surf veteran who advised me to proceed from Cat Harbor and venture south, being sure to look at two well-known spots first, Shark Harbor and Ben Weston Beach. But he then dangled a tantalizing proposition about an outer reef just off Salta Verde that seldom breaks but is epic when it does. While I could sit on the back of my boat and armchair dream about such possibilities, I realized that I had to actually motor out there and take a look to confirm what I had been told. Meditation as an expedition is not different in that regard. This naturally doesn't mean that what we experience will invariably be characterized exactly how others have done so before, but it does provide us with the necessary background to make our own adjudications, rightly or wrongly. I have now meditated for nearly 50 years, with the past 5 years being my most intensive. On the exploratory front, and given my deep interest in consciousness studies, I think the budding field of neuroscience can greatly benefit by taking up the practice, since it provides rich interior detail to what can happen to the brain under concentrative circumstances. As for myself, I have gained a much greater appreciation of how and why the brain constantly simulates an almost endless stream of endgame scenarios. Second nature consciousness is a virtual simulator par excellence, and because of its prodigious output, we invariably get ensnared within its balloon-like worlds. If by deep meditation we can stand apart from such enveloping excursions, we can witness a profound undoing, and in the process experience hitherto hidden realms of being. Therefore, I cannot say that I meditate for a singular reason, though simple enjoyment remains a mainstay, just as I don't surf with one purpose in mind. If consciousness can be likened to an ocean of possibilities, then it seems wise to want to explore the depths of that realm as well as its surface topography. Meditation is a present. Yes, the pun is intended, since in the Darwinian struggle of existence, it is rare for Homo sapiens to have freedom from the day-to-day demands of making a living. Just as being bored is a privilege only accorded to those who have sufficient time and resources not to be obligated by overwhelming individual or social needs. To be able to sit still for a set duration of time and not be distracted by outer wants and needs is a precious opportunity. I find myself lucky to be able to indulge in such a wondrous adventure. What it will ultimately lead to, I cannot predict. But I do know that, like surfing, it is a process that is rewarding in itself, even if I wipe out on occasion or get skunked by a lack of swell or an impenetrable fog bank. Jagat Singh perhaps said it best about meditation when he opined, "Let things happen as they do naturally. You cannot hustle the power within." Or, as Ramana pithily argued, "There is no greater mystery than this, that we keep seeking reality, though in fact we are reality. We think that there is something hiding reality, and that this must be destroyed before reality is gained. How ridiculous! A day will dawn when you will laugh at all your past efforts. That which will be the day you laugh is also here and now." How to meditate. When meditation is mastered, the mind is unwavering like the flame of a candle in a windless place. Bhagavad Gita. How to meditate. Meditation is the dissolution of thoughts in eternal awareness or pure consciousness without objectification, knowing without thinking, merging finitude in infinity. Voltaire. My nephew Shanti asked me the other day for recommendations on introductory books on how to meditate. I wanted to send him something, but I soon realized that I wasn't satisfied with what was on offer. Many were too simplistic for my tastes, and others were too religiously bound. I decided that perhaps it would be fruitful to provide a brief explanation behind why meditation works and provide step-by-step directions on how to do it. Given that there are so many meditational disciplines, I thought I would just focus on the one technique that I've been doing these past 40 or so years. The following is my limited attempt to explain the ins and outs of meditation, without unnecessarily intertwining it with religious mythology. Of course, some may argue that just such an interpretive matrix is necessary to fully benefit from sitting still, and that meditation cannot properly be divorced from its cultural or religious moorings. I beg to differ, since I believe that meditation works regardless of nationality, ethnicity, or religious affiliation. Why? Because meditation is a universal process of exploring how consciousness manifests and changes over time. The meditator is simply experiencing the varietals of awareness. Our attention is akin to an ocean navigator that plots courses along a vast territory, and whose directions guide the would-be wayfarer to far-off and rarely visited islands. There are innumerable vistas in our universe of consciousness, but seldom do we actually take the time and energy to fully venture into those realms. The mind is a simulation operator, and evolved to allow individuals to imagine and plan for events not yet occurring in the world we live and breathe in. As Michio Kaku, theoretical physicist at City College of New York, explains in his most recent book, The Future of the Mind, human consciousness is a specific form of consciousness that creates a model of the world and then simulates it in time by evaluating the past to simulate the future. This requires mediating and evaluating many feedback loops to make a decision to achieve a goal. Gerald Edelman, a distinguished Nobel Prize winner and a pioneer in understanding the brain, argues that consciousness has two fundamental aspects. First nature, which is usually defined as present moment awareness, which appears to be common in almost all birds and animals, including humans. It is associative and attentive to incoming stimuli and the surrounding environment. Second nature, which arguably is only fully realized in human beings, though it is also apparent to lesser degrees in higher mammals, is self-reflective and dissociative, evolved to ruminate, contemplate, and virtually represent, with an emphasis on the past events, and to envision and plan for future actions and scenarios. If first nature is focused on the here and now, second nature is where we daydream, fantasize, and space out. It is, in sum, a virtual simulator. As Michio Kaku elaborates, humans are alone in the animal kingdom in understanding the concept of tomorrow. Unlike animals, we constantly ask ourselves, what if? Weeks, months, even years into the future. So I believe Level 3 consciousness, Edelman's second nature, creates a model of its place in the world and then simulates it in the future by making rough predictions. Kaku's space-time theory of consciousness and Edelman's two-nature understanding of awareness are helpful theoretic orientations for us to better understand how and why meditation works. Meditation involves many levels of deployment. Primarily, it is concerned with bringing our attention back to the present moment and becoming aware of what is happening here and now. In order to do this, one builds a bridge between second and first nature, so that one can let go of consuming revelries and become attuned with the current locality. This is more difficult than one might suspect, since our brains evolve to disengage and imagine all sorts of scenarios that don't need our immediate scrutiny. If we watch how our mind functions moment to moment, we can see how easily we fluctuate about. From paying attention to what is constantly changing in our field of sight, sound, and touch, boarding an airplane, say, to daydreaming about what we are going to do with our eventual careers, sitting in a classroom during a boring lecture, for instance. Our awareness is akin to a wild animal that doesn't settle too long at any one place. This monkey mind never really rests, not even in sleep, and dissipates energy in this continual process. Getting the mind to settle down isn't an easy thing to do, but once accomplished, even if only in degrees, it not only energizes one's being, but also offers a pathway to experience hitherto neglected aspects of awareness. First and second nature are waves of a much deeper and broader body of consciousness. The process of meditating is to follow the source from which our awareness originally arises, and to witness how it both presages and transcends the waking and dream states that we are so familiar with. Speaking from my own experience, I can say without any reservations that there are some wonderful benefits to this internal quest, not the least of which are deeper insights into how the mind actually works and a widening sense of bliss the more one plunges deeper into awareness itself. Of course, we have to be careful over how we interpret what we discover on your inner journeys. As humans, we seem to have an almost genetic predisposition to conflate our brain state with the real state of the universe, and wax hyperbolic about our latest enlightenments. Far too often, religion or other ideologies attempt to hijack our inner experiences and intertwine them with their own theological agendas, prematurely blinding us from keeping open-minded to alternative explanations. The common denominator in all meditative practices, whether Buddhist or Christian or secular humanist, is the human brain, which, thankfully, isn't tied down to any ism or geographic region. But how does one meditate? Find a quiet space somewhere in your home or office or outside. Best if it is a spot that you can go to routinely. Wear something comfortable and not too tight-fitting. Choose a mat or a chair that will allow you to sit in a relaxed manner for an extended period of time. Sitting up straight, but not rigidly, place your arms and hands on your lap or on your legs, making sure that you won't have to move them unnecessarily. Before you begin, it is best to determine a set time for how long you're going to sit. At first, do something short, like 10 minutes. You can always increase the time as you progress. The key to meditation is to use a technique that will slow down the ruminating mind. Some adherents recommend watching one's breathing, whereas others suggest being a witness to whatever arises and keeping in the witness space. I have found using a mantra or a repeated phrase or name to be quite effective, since it tends to keep one on a single track. Which name or phrase one uses is entirely a personal affair, but once chosen, it is probably best to stick with it, since it isn't the word or series of words that works, but the concentration or focus it can bring about. Close your eyes and sit as still as possible without trying to move any part of your body. Don't force the issue, but a good example to mimic is a street mime who can stand almost frozen for prolonged stretches. As you sit, you will immediately notice how the mind begins a series of simulations or revelries. I liken these to projective envelopes that once they capture your attention, take you off on first-class excursions, only to depart you precisely where you started. There are innumerable such projections. Try to see if you can avoid getting involved in their respective trajectories. It is hard at first, since the nature of the mind is to actually carry you along such streams of imagination. If you can avoid taking on such flights of fancy and keeping one's attention behind the eyes, but without straining whatsoever, then one can become internally aware within. This awareness can be a bit startling. It is like a blind person first getting a glimpse of a rainbow, or a deaf person hearing Mozart. Several possibilities unfold as one gets deeper into meditation. First is sleep, which is always a potential problem, particularly if one is not fully rested. Second is a state of inertia where one senses nothing is happening and gets bored with the whole affair, and gets up and finds something to eat, or turn on the television, or check status updates on Facebook. Third, one enters into a conscious hypnagogic state that is somewhat akin to lucid dreaming, except that one enters this portal semi-aware. This is an intriguing stage, since one can literally see whole panoramas that seem as real as anything viewed in the outside world. Indeed, any object, such as an apple, can manifest in one's line of sight, and one can study its minute detail and later recall it as well. This is a lateral state in meditation, as it is the zone between waking and sleep. All of these states and others like them are transitional and not to be expected during meditation. However, they are not progressive or necessarily bliss-inducing. They are merely topical variations of what the waking and dreaming mind does when placed under sensory deprivation. If one can stay within the focus and avoid sleep, hypnagogic surrealism, and bored inertia, something quite remarkable begins to emerge. The body starts to feel an unusual numbness, which, unlike the annoying sensation when our feet or legs go to sleep after sitting too long, is quite pleasant, even if a bit alarming. As this numbness takes over the entire body, you will feel as if you are entering into a heightened state of awareness, such that it seems as if a lost world is opening up. The inner senses become exceptionally keen, and the darkness gives way to sparkles of light. Our attention is now becoming comfortable with being within, and starts to enjoy exploring what this new heightened state brings with it. Not only does our visual sense become more acute, so do our sense of hearing and our sense of bliss. Just as when we travel to a new country for the first time, we see and hear things anew, so too when we meditate and spend significant time within. New visions and new sounds arise within this emerging layer of awareness, which should not be confused with either dreaming or waking, since it belongs to neither. It is as if one is venturing into the source of where virtual simulations initially emerge. This is similar to going to a movie theater, and instead of watching the screen, one turns around and looks at the projector itself. Foregoing watching moving images, one observes the source from where such images arise. This can be quite disconcerting, since the mind has the habit of involving us in its manifold simulations. It is rare for anyone to avoid such outpourings and reverse course to trace, like a trout going upstream, where the source of such manifestations pours forth. With this new level of awareness, what one experiences seems more real than anything prior. The danger is that in this new state, one can start to get entranced by varying visions or insights, and get delusions of grandeur. The key is to stay calm and detached if one wishes to progress further, and avoid being too bogged down or attached to such inner fireworks. This is easier said than done. The light that manifests is soothing to contemplate, and will settle the mind. However, that very light can, like its physical counterpart, break into a spectrum, and if not checked, seduce one into a fantastic diversion. An enclosed world the likes of which are unimaginable. This is not dissimilar to how we get caught into the drama of a dream, forgetting that what we are chasing is our own projection. The sounds that one can hear within is at first coarse and provides no attractive pull, but eventually it too takes on a refined character and has an irresistible appeal. Its force is such that it causes one to move inwards and upwards, as if taking a trip on a supersonic flight. The subtler the sound, the more enchanting it becomes. A meditator here is likened to a surfer who wishes to know how the waves he rides were created. By following the stream of light and sound to its source, and not getting too distracted by the phantasms it too can create, we melt deeper into consciousness without an object. We consciously begin to see how simulations rise and fall like sea waves, whereas the ocean at its depth remains undisturbed. Consciousness itself isn't an object, but an indefinable subject with no perceivable boundaries. Meditation can be likened to a microscope that allows one to see deeper into the nature of consciousness itself. It can also be likened to a telescope, since it provides glimpses to how our awareness arises in time. In both cases, however, how far one goes depends on how willing one is to spend the time contemplating within. Practically speaking, consistent meditation, doing it daily at a prescribed time, for example, is better in the long run than sporadically meditating, since consistency tends to build a deeper groove in the mind and allows one to better understand how simulations run their course. Conclusion. Whether one meditates for 3 minutes or 3 hours, however, one will feel its beneficial effects. Just as any exercise is better than none, so it is the same with meditation. Remember, it is your consciousness that has given birth to the world you experience. Directly inquiring into how that consciousness arises is an exhilarating adventure. Where it will eventually lead and how we will ultimately interpret such excursions, be they neurological or mystical, is up to us. The problem with introspection is that it has no end. Philip K. Dick. Meditating Catholic. There are two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. Buddha. Meditating Catholic. Although I've prayed in Catholic churches from the age of 3 or 4, it was not until I was 11 or 12 that I took up meditating in them. St. Charles in North Hollywood, now Valley Village, was the church of my childhood, and I think it was fraught with too many bad memories of nuns, priests, confessions, and long penances to kindle my spiritual inclinations. Other enclaves, devoid of any familial connections, provided me with more inspiration. When I was 20 years old, an older friend of mine, in his mid-60s, Johnny Haddad, and I decided to visit the New Camaldoli Hermitage in Big Sur. We planned on staying for a week in our cloistered cells doing meditation and reading sacred literature. It was a frustrating trip for me, since as we were driving up the coast I could see that a large and newly arriving swell was hitting the Pacific coast. As a surfer, I was aching to catch some of the big waves, but I knew that I had already committed to stay at the Catholic retreat. The monks assigned us each a private room adjacent to each other. Our daily food and drink would arrive through a sliding door, and we would essentially have no contact outside of Vespers and early morning Mass. At first, we enjoyed the solitude and the quiet time, but after a few days, and hearing the pounding surf, I was getting anxious to leave, but I felt that Johnny was in for the long haul, so I didn't want to hurry him. Yet, much to my pleasant surprise, Johnny knocked on my wall, and in a plaintive yelp cried out, "I am bored stiff. Let's get the hell out of here." Being slightly embarrassed by our lack of fortitude, we came up with some lame excuse about a family emergency, and we hastily drove out of the hermitage laughing at how feeble our hermit-like attempt had been. I think we both liked the idea of being a monk more than actually practicing being one. Yet I do think this brief encounter with private holiness did influence me as I began to seek out varying Catholic churches whenever I wanted to get a bit of alone time. When I started teaching Christology and moral theology at Moreau Catholic High School in Hayward, California, in 1979, I was happy to discover that there was a chapel on the second floor. Invariably, during lunchtime, I would sneak off for 40 minutes or so and blissfully meditate before my next class started. I was bummed the following year when, due to the Holy Cross's remodeling plans, the chapel was shut down. The next two Catholic high schools that I taught at, Chaminade College Prep and the University of San Diego High School, had chapels, but they were busy affairs, and it was difficult to meditate in either alone. However, I did notice that the University of San Diego, which was right across the street, had a magnificent church which was surprisingly empty most of the time, and quite conducive for meditating or praying. I used to visit it after browsing the USD library. There were also several other temples that caught my attention around this time as well, including the Self-Realization Fellowship's meditative enclave in Encinitas, and, perhaps most impressive of all, the Vedanta Temple in Hollywood, which was right next to the 101 freeway, but which was eerily still and peaceful. My fondness for Catholic churches as meditative escapes became renewed this last year when I discovered a stunning Catholic church dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi just blocks away from our desert home in La Quinta, California. What most impressed me about this particular church, besides the dramatic mountain directly behind it, was the austere simplicity of its architecture. The only drawback is that the church is not always open, so one has to be lucky in timing one's visits accordingly. Because of the wonderful setting and experiences I've had in the St. Francis of Assisi Catholic Church in the desert, I have begun an informal quest to consciously seek out similar places for quiet meditation. So far this past month, I have come upon 2 more contemplative retreats. The first one I came upon by chance as I was on a surf trip with my family in La Jolla Shores. After I visited one of my all-time favorite bookstores, D.G. Will's, I ended up taking a wrong turn and ended up on Girard Street, only to come upon an exquisite Catholic church right in the middle of the shopping district, appropriately named Mary Star of the Sea. This quaint and very airy church, with its wafts of fresh ocean air circulating throughout, has an old California charm to it. The only drawback is that it can be a bit noisy due to its bustling location, but even that is mitigated by its delightful ambiance. The wooden floors and benches give it a charm often missing in newer churches. My most recent pilgrimage is closer to my home in Huntington Beach. Just off of Talbot Street, right next to a cemetery, stands a stunning Catholic church called St. Vincent de Paul, which represents an almost postmodern version of a cathedral. Disorienting at first, since the altar is literally surrounded by 3 sides, the church is remarkably open and spacious. I was most impressed by the fact that the church was open every day until 8:30 at night. Interestingly, and not without irony, I always avoid Catholic churches whenever there is a Mass or some other ceremony which draws a crowd. In this regard, I only like going to these places of worship when there is almost nobody there worshiping. It is when such churches are almost vacant that I find them the most alluring. It might seem odd that a skeptic like myself, who more or less despises much of Catholic theology and much of its sordid past, would find refuge in such God-believing places. But I think even the most ardent of atheists can find solace in religious centers, primarily because they represent focal places of human longing, regardless of whether one accepts the metaphysical theologies that underpin their existence. Catholic churches, like Jewish synagogues or Hindu temples, are, in general, places where human beings gather to pour out their deepest yearnings and longings, and, within this context, represent some of the noblest ideals of what it means to be a vulnerable human being. If one can look past the theological trappings that seem endemic to such sacred houses, then one can tap into a fulcrum of genuinely heartfelt emotion. Seen from this perspective, it could perhaps be argued that religious centers of varying kinds are indeed sacred centers for human beings, even if one enters such abodes devoid of any supernatural belief. Here is my little checklist of what I look for in my pursuit of meditating Catholic, even in the midst of eschewing a specific Christian belief system. 1. The church should be empty or close to empty. Practically speaking, I found mid-morning or mid-afternoon to be the best time to find the fewest attendees. 2. Niches within the church. I personally like it when a particular church has small enclaves within it. For example, side seats devoted to various saints or to the Virgin Mary or Joseph. 3. Open door policy. It is disconcerting to go to a Catholic church only to find that it is closed most of the time or only open Sundays or for special events. 4. Aesthetic appeal. The architectural beauty of a church is an essential key. I remember back in the late 1970s hearing Professor Jacob Needleman going on and on about how beautiful Notre Dame Cathedral was in Paris, France. I thought he was exaggerating until I actually visited it several times in the 1990s. It was breathtaking, and I can imagine even Richard Dawkins genuflecting when taking in its beauty. The theological cul-de-sac. Be the master of mind rather than mastered by mind. Japanese proverb. The theological cul-de-sac. How our spirituality gets entrapped by religious belief systems. Shabda Yoga works. It is an ancient technique that when performed correctly can elicit a series of remarkable experiences, not the least of which is a deep sense of euphoria. However, this ancient practice, which apparently dates at least to the pre-Vedic period in India, has become so intertwined with varying religious doctrines, ranging from Gnostism to Sikhism, that the simplicity of its technique has been overshadowed by unnecessary theological overlays. The technique is not at all complex. Sitting as still as possible, the neophyte calmly and patiently listens to subtler and subtler internal sounds within one's head with the desired aim of melting or blending into certain melodies that give one an almost immediate sense of bliss. Varying religious systems have arisen in India and elsewhere which have attempted to give a spiritual or ontological interpretation to what these inner sounds mean and what they purport. However, the technique itself doesn't have to be lost to such theological entrapments because it actually succeeds regardless of whether one is an atheist, agnostic, or a firm believer. Just as anyone can potentially have amazing dreams at night, so anyone can potentially hear inner sounds and have remarkable experiences thereby. But the utter simplicity of Shabda Yoga has all too often been encrusted with religious dogmas so that one tends to believe that a prior initiation under a so-called master is necessary before one can listen to the inner sound current. While guru followers may believe such, the fact remains that the technique demands no such restrictions, since it is essentially the innate ability within human beings to focus their attention within. Seeing inner light, or hearing inner sounds, or following subjectively the source of one's consciousness isn't so much a granted privilege bestowed only on a deserving few, but instead part and parcel of being a human being endowed with self-reflective awareness. The following excerpt, Esoterica from the East, is designed to present ancient yogic practices by focusing more on their technical aspect than their religious explanations. In order to accomplish this aim, we have tended to center on the practical aspects given in earlier codices, even though they are invariably theologically embedded. Nada Bindu Upanishad. He who lives in harmony with himself lives in harmony with the universe. Marcus Aurelius. Nada Bindu Upanishad, translated by K. Narayanaswamy IR, 26b to 27. As a person through illusion mistakes a rope for a serpent, so the fool not knowing Satya, the eternal truth, sees the world to be true. When he knows it to be a piece of rope, the illusory idea of a serpent vanishes. 28 to 29a. So when he knows the eternal substratum of everything, and all the universe becomes, therefore, void to him, where then is prarabdha to him, the body being a part of the world? Therefore, the word prarabdha is accepted to enlighten the ignorant only. 29b to 30. Then as prarabdha has, in course of time, worn out, he who is the sound resulting from the union of pranava with Brahman, who is the absolute effulgence itself, and who is the bestower of all good, shines himself like the sun at the dispersion of the clouds. 31. The yogin, being in the siddhasana, posture, and practicing the Vaishnavi mudra, should always hear the internal sound through the right ear. 32. The sound which he thus practices makes him deaf to all external sounds. Having overcome all obstacles, he enters the Turiya state within 15 days. 33. In the beginning of his practice, he hears many loud sounds. They gradually increase in pitch and are heard more and more subtly. 34. At first, the sounds are like those proceeding from the ocean, clouds, kettledrum, and cataracts. In the middle stage, those proceeding from mardala, a musical instrument, bell, and horn. 35. At the last stage, those proceeding from tinkling bells, flute, vina, a musical instrument, and bees. Thus he hears many such sounds more and more subtle. 36. When he comes to that stage when the sound of the great kettle drum is being heard, he should try to distinguish only sounds more and more subtle. 37. He may change his concentration from the gross sound to the subtle, or from the subtle to the gross, but he should not allow his mind to be diverted from them towards others. 38. The mind, having at first concentrated itself on any one sound, fixes firmly to that, and is absorbed in it. 39. It, the mind, becoming insensible to the external impressions, becomes one with the sound as milk with water, and then becomes rapidly absorbed in chidakasa, the akasa where chit prevails. 40. Being indifferent towards all objects, the yogin, having controlled his passions, should by continual practice concentrate his attention upon the sound which destroys the mind. 41. Having abandoned all thoughts and being freed from all actions, he should always concentrate his attention on the sound, and then his citta becomes absorbed in it. 42 to 43a. Just as the bee drinking the honey alone does not care for the odor, so the citta, which is always absorbed in sound, does not long for sensual objects, as it is bound by the sweet smell of nada and has abandoned its flitting nature. 43b to 44a. The serpent citta, through listening to the nada, is entirely absorbed in it, and becoming unconscious of everything, concentrates itself on the sound. 44b to 45a. The sound serves the purpose of a sharp goad to control the maddened elephant, citta, which roves in the pleasure garden of the sensual objects. 45b to 46a. It serves the purpose of a snare for binding the deer, citta. It also serves the purpose of a shore to the ocean waves of citta. 46b to 47a. The sound proceeding from pranava, which is Brahman, is of the nature of effulgence. The mind becomes absorbed in it. That is the supreme seat of Vishnu. 47b to 48a. The sound exists till there is the akasic conception, akasa sankapa. Beyond this is the asabda, soundless para-Brahman, which is param atman. 48b. The mind exists so long as there is sound, but with its sound cessation, there is the state called unmani of manas, namely the state of being above the mind. 49a. This sound is absorbed in the akshara, indestructible, and the soundless state in the supreme seat. 49b to 50a. The mind, which along with prana, vayu, has its karmic affinities destroyed, by the constant concentration upon nada, is absorbed in the unstained one. There is no doubt of it. 50b to 51a. Many myriads of nadas and many more of bindus all become absorbed in the Brahma Pranava sound. 51b to 52a. Being freed from all states and all thoughts whatever, the yogin remains like one dead. He is mukta. There is no doubt about this. 52b. After that, he does not at any time hear the sounds of conch, or dundabai, large kettle drum. 53. The body in the state of unmani is certainly like a log, and does not feel heat or cold, joy or sorrow. 54. The yogin's citta, having given up fame or disgrace, is in samadhi, above the three states. 55. Being freed from the waking and the sleeping states, he attains to his true state. 56. when the spiritual sight becomes fixed without any object to be seen, when the vayu, prana, becomes still without any effort, and when the chitta becomes firm without any support, he becomes of the form of the internal sound of Brahma Pranava. Such is the Upanishad. Hatha Yoga Pradipika. When there are thoughts, it is distraction. When there are no thoughts, it is meditation. Ramana Maharishi. Hatha Yoga Pradipika, 15th century, by Svatmarama. 73. In the third stage, the sound of a drum is known to arise in the sunya between the eyebrows, and then the vayu goes to the mahasunya, which is the home of all the siddhis. 74. Conquering, then, the pleasures of the mind, ecstasy is spontaneously produced which is devoid of evils, pains, old age, disease, hunger, and sleep. 75. When the Rudra Granthi is pierced, and the air enters the seat of the Lord, the space between the eyebrows, then the perfect sound, like that of a flute, is produced. 76. The union of the mind and the sound is called Raja Yoga. The real yogi becomes the creator and destroyer of the universe, like God. 77. Perpetual happiness is achieved by this. I do not care if the mukti be not attained. This happiness resulting from absorption in Brahma is obtained by means of Raja Yoga. 78. Those who are ignorant of the Raja Yoga and practice only the Hatha Yoga will, in my opinion, waste their energy fruitlessly. 79. Contemplation on the space between the eyebrows is, in my opinion, best for accomplishing soon the Unmani state. For people of small intellect, it is a very easy method for obtaining perfections in the Raja Yoga. The laya produced by nada at once gives experience of spiritual powers. 80. The happiness which increases in the hearts of Yogiswaras who have gained success in samadhi by means of attention to the nada is beyond description, and is known to Sri Guru Natha alone. 81. The sound which a muni hears by closing his ears with his fingers should be heard attentively till the mind becomes steady in it. 82. By practicing with this nada, all other external sounds are stopped. The yogi becomes happy by overcoming all distractions within 15 days. 83. In the beginning, the sounds heard are of great variety and very loud, but as the practice increases, they become more and more subtle. 84. In the first stage, the sounds are surging, thundering like the beating of kettle drums, and jingling ones. In the intermediate stage, they are like those produced by conch, mridanga, bells, etc. 85. In the last stage, the sounds resemble those from tinklets, flute, veena, bee, etc. These various kinds of sounds are heard as being produced in the body. 86. Though hearing loud sounds like those of thunder, kettle drums, etc., one should practice with the subtle sounds also. 87. Leaving the loudest, taking up the subtle one, and leaving the subtle one, taking up the loudest, thus practicing, the distracted mind does not wander elsewhere. 88. Wherever the mind attaches itself first, it becomes steady there, and when it becomes absorbed in it. 89. Just as a bee drinking sweet juice does not care for the smell of the flower, so the mind, absorbed in the nada, does not desire the objects of enjoyment. 90. The mind, like an elephant habituated to wander in the garden of enjoyments, is capable of being controlled by the sharp goad of anahata nada. 91. The mind, captivated in the snare of nada, gives up all its activity, and, like a bird with clipped wings, becomes calm at once. 92. Those desirous of the kingdom of yoga should take up the practice of hearing the anahata nada, with mind collected and free from all cares. 93. Nada is the snare for catching the mind, and when it is caught like a deer, it can be killed also like it. 94. Nada is the bolt of the stable door for the horse, the minds of the yogis. A yogi should determine to practice constantly in the hearing of the nada sounds. 95. Mind gets the properties of calcined mercury. When deprived of its unsteadiness, it is calcined, combined with the sulfur of nada, and then it roams like it in the supportless akasa or Brahma. 96. The mind is like a serpent. Forgetting all its unsteadiness by hearing the nada, it does not run away anywhere. 97. The fire, catching firewood, is extinguished along with it after burning it up, and so the mind also, working with the nada, becomes latent along with it. 98. The antakarana, mind, like a deer, becomes absorbed and motionless on hearing the sounds of bells, etc., and then it is very easy for an expert archer to kill it. 99. The knowable interpenetrates the anahata sound when it is heard, and the mind interpenetrates the knowable. The mind becomes absorbed there, which is the seat of the all-pervading, almighty Lord. 100. So long as the sounds continue, there is the idea of akasa. When they disappear, then it is called para-brahma, paramatmana. 101. Whatever is heard in the form of nada is the sakti, power. That which is formless, the final state of the tattvas, is the paramaswara. 102. All the methods of hatha are meant for gaining success in Raja Yoga, for the man who is well established in the Raja Yoga overcomes death. 103. Tattva is the seed, hatha the field, and indifference, vairagya, the water. By the action of these three, the creeper unmani thrives very rapidly. 104. All the accumulations of sins are destroyed by practicing always with the nada, and the mind and the airs do certainly become latent in the colorless, paramatmana. 105. Such a one does not hear the noise of the conch and dundubi. Being in the unmani avastha, his body becomes like a piece of wood. 106. There is no doubt such a yogi becomes free from all states, from all cares, and remains like one dead. Simran, Dhyan, and Bhajan. If you want the truth, I'll tell you the truth. Listen to the secret sound, the real sound, which is inside you. Kabir. Simran, Dhyan, and Bhajan. Repetition, focusing, and listening. One of the more instructive books on the efficacy of constant repetition of a prayer or mantra, or even a self-generated phrase, is found in the anonymously authored The Way of a Pilgrim. In this narrative, the author recounts how he learned that by repeating the Jesus prayer thousands of times a day, his mind became inwardly centered and peaceful. In Shabda Yoga practice, this mechanical repetition is a means by which one's attention begins to gravitate within. Concurrently with such repetition, it has been advised to contemplate or focus one's visual faculty, nirat, at the proverbial third eye. To help facilitate this visual focusing, dhyan, some yogis have suggested contemplating on any sparkling light that may arise. By doing both, the mind tends to get absorbed. The more this is done before even attempting to listen to the inner sound, bhajan, the easier it becomes to absorb oneself in subtler and subtler melodies. The first robust sensation that occurs, which indicates that the meditation procedure is working, is an overall numbness in the lower extremities. This sensation should not be confused with how one's foot or leg goes to sleep if positioned too long in one place. Rather, the feeling of numbness is distinguished by an emerging sense of withdrawal from the lower part of the body, such that a distinct pulling occurs from the top of the head and beyond. If the numbness rises to the chest and above, the meditator's internal concentration will be exponentially magnified, and the particular sound of a tinkling bell or bells will become more and more refined. This pealing of this inner sound has a dramatic effect on one's consciousness, so much so that an overwhelming feeling of leaving one's own body emerges. Indeed, the rush is such that it can literally make the meditator feel as if he or she is entering into a totally new realm of existence. Once this occurs, a deep tunneling sensation permeates the meditator's visual field. At the end of the tunnel is a brilliant light, which, due to deeper and deeper levels of concentration, alters in shading and intensity. Multiple lights can be seen to emerge out of this fulcrum. If followed closely to their inevitable descent and reabsorption, the meditator can get so enthralled by what such lights produce that he or she can occupy a virtual play, not dissimilar to an exceedingly lucid dream. It can be argued that this electromagnetic fount, neurologically or mystically interpreted, is how astral worlds become projected by one's own awareness. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is psychologically illustrative on this point, and that is perhaps one of the reasons that they instruct deep meditators to avoid chasing after such lights, since they create worlds the like of which are difficult to awaken from. This is analogous, of course, to deeply enjoyable dreams we have at night, but which, being so pleasurable, are difficult to consciously extract ourselves from. According to Shabda Yoga, it is the sound that empowers or juices the inner journey. While the light may be radiantly attractive and allows for increased attention, it is the subtler sounds which energize and sweep the meditator into wholly unexpected regions of awareness. For instance, while a high-definition film digitally projected at our local cinema can be exceedingly attractive, it is the powerful surround sound system that jolts one into the proceedings. Just as lightning from a distance can be quite attractive, it is the thunder, however, that involves our entire being, particularly if it is nearby. Interestingly, in some yogic texts much is made of a thunder-like sound that allegedly transforms the wandering mind. In any case, the whole modus operandi in Shabda Yoga is to follow the sound current to its terminal source. The finer the sound, the more pulling it becomes, and the more it leads to internal changes within one's own awareness. Just as the fountain of light, when broken up into a spectrum, causes varying illuminations and virtual worlds colored by such effects, the same holds true with higher internal sounds, which, when intensely caught, carry one's consciousness into hitherto unexplored dimensions. The religious systems which have grown up around Shabda and Nod practice have developed a sophisticated cosmology which attempts to hierarchically arrange the inner sounds and lights into an ascending order from matter to mind to soul to God, utilizing a staircase of higher regions with such terms as Sahansdal Kanwal, Trikuti, Daswan Dwar, Banwar Gupa, and Sachkhand. The use of a 5-name mantra in varying Sant Mat and Radhaswami circles appears to be predicated upon this theological tier system, where greater and lesser deities occupy a great chain of being. While all of this is undoubtedly of great interest and importance to devotees of these guru traditions, it doesn't hold that such a cosmology is necessary or even important for one merely interested in following the simple technique of Shabda Yoga. In other words, it doesn't follow that the theology is a necessary prelude to the practice of the sound current. Simply put, hearing inner sounds and seeing inner lights precedes each and every theology that has wrapped itself around the natural and human practice of internalizing one's attention via meditation. Can Shabda Yoga be successfully practiced by a person who doesn't believe in Indian mystical theology? Yes, just as millions of people worldwide have benefited from engaging Hatha Yoga regardless of whether they believe in Kundalini, chakras, or Shiva. Understandably, some long-time adherents may object to stripping down Shabda Yoga to its skeletal form, since much of the philosophy that has evolved with it may be seen as a necessary component. However, because so much of Shabda Yoga has been encrusted with mystical musings, the very simplicity of the practice has, ironically, been neglected by those who are its strongest advocates. The technique, shorn of such theological cul-de-sacs, can be easily explained in one long sentence. Sitting still with one's eyes and ears closed, whether in a squatting position with elbows resting on one's knees or using a T-stick for accomplishing the same, the meditator turns his or her attention within by an ancient algorithm of repetition and contemplation, so that one can listen to finer and finer sounds which cause an elevation of one's consciousness into subtler and subtler forms of awareness and bliss. The whole thing is just attention, and then unbroken attention at the eye center, allowing no other thought to intrude itself into the consciousness and lead you away from the center. Sawan Singh. The physics of going within. The unattainable is attained by its unattainment. Nicholas of Cusa. The physics of going within. In analyzing Shabda Yoga from a more dispassionate viewpoint, putting in brackets such spiritualized concepts as Guru Bhakti and grace, it is possible to break down the meditation technique into precise components. Such an analysis allows one to understand the process from a different vantage point, which in itself may be both instructive and helpful for the neophyte. Saying the 5-name mantra in Radha Swami silently but methodically takes anywhere from 5 to 8 seconds. Roughly speaking, we can repeat this mantra about 8 times a minute, give or take a couple rounds. If one meditates 2 hours, it translates as about 1,000 rounds of repetition. The 8-second mantra can be broken down further to its separate words. First name, 1 second plus. Second name, 1 second or less, and so on. In terms of computational language, each letter equals a byte. If we include the space between each word, the entire 5-name mantra is equal to 42 bytes of information. Of course, the number 42 was made famous by Douglas Adams in his widely read science fiction novel, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, where he alleges that the natural number is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. It also has the distinction of being known by computer programmers as a wild card, since it is represented by an asterisk. It is also the atomic number of molybdenum. Thus, 2 hours of Simran equals 42,000 bytes, or approximately 41 kilobytes. Since the object of repetition is concentration, the key is to see how focused the mind can be in any singular moment. But exactly what is a moment in awareness? In the mid-19th century, Hermann Helmholtz and his assistant Wilhelm Wundt studied how fast nerve impulses traveled, which turned out to be much slower than first expected. Whatever we might presume about immediate, one thing is certainly clear: it is never instantaneous. As John McCrone explains, modern research has since shown that human nerves actually conduct at a whole range of speeds, the rate depending on the size of the axon and also the thickness of the fatty insulation material, known as myelin, wrapped around it. The nervous system is like a road network with a few fast motorways and many winding country lanes. Large, heavily myelinated nerves such as the muscle and sensory nerves which must run the length of the body, transmit their impulses at up to 240 miles per hour. But the congested network of small, unmyelinated nerves, which make up the bulk of our brain, work much more slowly. Once inside our heads, impulses tend to crawl along at between 2 and 20 miles per hour. What such conduction speeds mean is that while consciousness might be fast, it cannot be instant. It takes a minimum of 10 to 20 milliseconds, thousandths of a second, for any sensory message to reach the brain. After that, the brain must spend yet more time in evolving a response. An easy way to grasp the significance of this is to see how easily the brain can be duped into believing that still pictures are moving when they are shown in rapid succession, usually 20 frames per second. We tend to blur any image that is shown sequentially in less than 50 milliseconds. Accordingly, a perceptual moment apparently can range anywhere from a minimum of 40 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds. Or, as Benjamin Libet suggested, there is a half-second delay relay in our perceptual awareness. No matter how we parse a moment, we know that it takes milliseconds for something to be perceived, and that it can disappear within seconds. By paying attention only to the word being repeated silently within, the moment gets occupied by the said word, and hopefully with the next word, and so on. However, within these segregated instances, the mind often roams in and out of other thoughts that distract from the desired object of attention. The difficulty is that it is exceedingly troublesome to stay concentrated on any particular word or sequence of words consistently for a sustained duration of time. The end result is a lack of progress in meditation, and the practitioner ends up spending more time either daydreaming or temporarily, if not more permanently, falling asleep. Perhaps the secret to deep concentration in meditation resides in how well we can thicken or immerse our focus in any particular moment. By this, I mean increasing our ability to stay or reside within the stream of our repetition while centering on any emerging light that may arise. Hence, in this context, meditation is not something we do for 2 hours at a stretch, though such a parameter may be our alarm clock goal, but rather developing our ability to keep fully focused for 8 seconds, or computationally 42 bytes. Of course, this can only be achieved if we can first master 500 milliseconds, 1 second, and so on. However, if such concentration can be achieved, certain telltale signs arise which can be both attractive and distracting. Distracting because when a certain level of concentration is achieved, one tends to divert one's attention away from Simran and start enjoying the increasing bliss of calmness. In addition, when the body starts to go numb due to the withdrawal of awareness from the sensory apparatus, a certain anxiety arises, as if something unusual is about to occur. This feeling of expectation increases as the concentration increases, which conversely limits the continued withdrawal, since one then gets distracted anew by the surprising sensation of unexpected numbness. This is precisely when and where doing repetition within the series of moments gets more difficult, since keeping at the focus provides ancillary flashes of pleasure. If one can indeed stay focused, sparks of light begin to illuminate what otherwise appears to be mostly smeared darkness. Doing Simran, looking at the light, especially one particulate which stands out from the rest, actually increases one's concentration, since it now occupies the visual sense, which prior had nothing to center on precisely. If one can steady into the light and keep the mantra intact, one's consciousness then starts to go consciously within, not dissimilar to the process of falling asleep, except that in this case, one's keen self-awareness and lucidity increase manifold. So much so, in point of fact, that there is a pulling sensation that emerges that tugs one into a different state of reflection. In Shabda Yoga, however, the final pull-out of awareness is optimized by listening to subtler and subtler sounds. usually musical in intonation, which in the preliminary stages is similar to cascading bells, that become markedly distinct as the concentration becomes steadfast within the eye focus. At this point, the danger is that such sounds distract one from repeating the mantra, so that one can often get bifurcated and lose the full power of their leveraged concentration. It is perhaps for this reason that Shabda yogis have suggested concentrating on Simran and Dhyan first without attending to the inner sounds that may arise. If the Simran is mastered to a significant degree, the switch over to listening to the inner sound doesn't necessarily lessen the concentration that was gained by constant and attentive repetition, particularly if the sound is strong and pulling, and provided one can become so absorbed into the sound wave as to ride with it, and merge from which itself forms. The neurobiology of meditation. If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. Meister Eckhart. The Neurobiology of Meditation. Excerpted. Rubia K., 2009, The Neurobiology of Meditation and Its Clinical Effectiveness in Psychiatric Disorders. Biological Psychology. Meditation is different from rest or sleep. It's a wakeful, hypometabolic state with lowered sympathetic activity as opposed to the fight and flight reactions which requires an active sympathetic system. Parasympathetic activity is increased, which is important for relaxation and rest. This increase of parasympathetic state is characterized by reduced heart rate, lower systolic blood pressure, lower oxygen metabolism, and an increase of skin resistance. So it's not only a rest state, but also physiological relaxation related to stress relief. But what is the effect of meditation on the brain? During meditation, not only general relaxation is experienced, but also a reduction of mental activity and positive affect. During meditation, the reduced mental activity is mediated by increased activation of networks of internalized attention, which trigger the activity in regions that mediate positive emotions. Networks related to external attention and irrelevant processes are decreased in activity. The networks activated for internal attention and positive mood are mainly located in the frontal and subcortical brain regions. The positive affect more specifically increases the activity in the left prefrontal and limbic region of the brain. The internal focused attention is thought to originate in an activation of frontal and thalamic region of the brain. There's also some evidence that experienced meditators show these activations and deactivations in a greater extent compared to novices in the field of meditation. In conclusion, there is converging evidence that frontoparietal and frontolimbic brain networks seem to be activated in the attention practices that lead to meditation, presumably reflecting processes of internalized, sustained attention and emotion regulation. One should keep in mind that these findings relate to meditation in general. Different kinds of meditations can result in slightly different activation and deactivation patterns. Different brain activation networks can thus be activated by different meditation traditions. These findings mostly result from comparison of small groups of experienced meditators compared to novices. MIT and Harvard on meditation. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Rumi. MIT and Harvard findings on meditation. Excerpt from Ann Trafton, MIT News Office. Studies have shown that meditating regularly can help relieve symptoms in people who suffer from chronic pain, but the neural mechanisms underlying the relief were unclear. Now, MIT and Harvard researchers have found a possible explanation for this phenomenon. In a study published online April 21st in the journal Brain Research Bulletin, the researchers found that people trained to meditate over an 8-week period were better able to control a specific type of brain waves called alpha rhythms. These activity patterns are thought to minimize distractions, to diminish the likelihood stimuli will grab your attention, says Christopher Moore, an MIT neuroscientist and senior author of the paper. Our data indicate that meditation training makes you better at focusing, in part by allowing you to better regulate how things that arise will impact you. There are several different types of brain waves that help regulate the flow of information between brain cells, similar to the way that radio stations broadcast at specific frequencies. Alpha waves, the focus of this study, flow through cells in the brain's cortex, where sensory information is processed. The alpha waves help suppress irrelevant or distracting sensory information. A 1966 study showed that a group of Buddhist monks who meditated regularly had elevated alpha rhythms across their brains. In the new study, the researchers focused on the wave's role in the specific part of the brain, cells of the sensory cortex that process tactile information from the hands and feet. For this study, the researchers recruited 12 subjects who had never meditated before. Half of the participants were trained in a technique called mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, over an 8-week period, while the other half were told not to meditate. The MBSR program calls for participants to meditate for 45 minutes per day after an initial 2.5-hour training session. The subjects listen to a CD recording that guides them through the sessions. The first 2 weeks are devoted to learning to pay close attention to body sensations. They are really learning to maintain and control their attention during the early part of the course. For example, they learn to focus sustained attention to the sensations of the breath. They also learn to engage and focus on body sensations in a specific area, such as the bottom of the feet, and then they practice disengaging and shifting the focus to another body area, says Catherine Kerr, an instructor at Harvard Medical School and lead author of the paper. The researchers did brain scans of the subjects before the study began, 3 weeks into it, and at the end of 8 weeks. At 8 weeks, the subjects who had been trained in meditation showed larger changes in the size, amplitude, of their alpha waves when asked to pay attention to a certain body part. For example, left foot. These changes in wave size also occurred more rapidly in the meditators. The study is a beautiful demonstration of the effects of meditation training and of the ability to cultivate an internal awareness of one's own bodily sensations, says Clifford Saron, Associate Research Scientist at the Center for Mind and Brain at the University of California at Davis, who is not involved in the research. Subjects in this study did not suffer from chronic pain, but the findings suggest that in pain sufferers who meditate, the beneficial effects may come from an ability to essentially turn down the volume on pain signals. They learn to be aware of where their attention is focused and not get stuck on the painful area, Kerr says. The subjects trained in meditation also reported that they felt less stressed than the non-meditators. Their objective condition might not have changed, but they're not as reactive to their situation, Kerr says. They're more able to handle stress. The researchers are now planning follow-up studies in patients who suffer from chronic pain as well as cancer patients, who have also been shown to benefit from meditation. Sawan Singh on meditation. I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness the astonishing light of your own being. Hafiz. Sawan Singh on deep meditation. Excerpted from Spiritual Gems. The bell and conch sounds are already within you. They are not to come from outside. All that is needed is that you should get nearer and within the eye focus to differentiate them from the chirpings of all sorts and catch them. The trouble is that although the mind wishes to rise to the focus, yet it does not like to leave the attachments of things on this side of the focus, and thereby does not make headway in that direction. Simran is incomplete yet. So long as mind does not sit in the focus and does not make it its headquarters, but continues running away from the focus, it has not benefited by the Simran practice. As a matter of fact, it is not doing the Simran practice. It is doing something else, away from the focus, secreting all sorts of thoughts, connected with worldly affairs, country affairs, professional affairs, household affairs, and other affairs. If the mind were busy in 1. Repeating the names, 2. Repeating them at the focus, it would be said to be doing Simran. But if tongue repeats names and mind is busy elsewhere, thinking of something else, then it is not Simran. Repeating of names in the focus is Simran, and remembering of something else elsewhere is Simran of that something. Simran of worldly things to which man is accustomed to be changed into Simran of the names in the focus. This must narrow down the mind, and this is what is called concentration. And there is no reason, if the mind sticks to the focus and is engaged therein in Simran, or hearing the current, that the extremities of the body, the hands, feet, arms, legs, and finally the trunk of the body, should not go numb. When in bhajan, the mind must do bhajan and nothing else. The door of the 10th gate opens automatically when mind and soul go in that direction and knock at it. If they run in another direction, the door remains shut. Nam is the rendezvous for all beings. It cures all sorts of ills. Guru Nanak says, "The whole world is miserable. Only he who is happy has taken to Nam." The sound current never stops, as it is only by means of sound current that the soul stays in the body. When the sound current stops, the soul will go out. The reason for your not hearing the sound is that your mind is so much engrossed in worldly matters that it does not allow the soul to go in. When the mind goes down, it ceases to catch the sound. The remedy is to bring about the concentration of the mind by means of careful repetition, which will make the mind and the soul still and collected, and therefore able to catch the sound current. Sometimes people come to me complaining that the sound current is so loud and powerful that they cannot bear it, and that its pitch and intensity should be weakened. It is only sound current which takes the soul up to higher regions. Indeed, it is the grand trunk road between ourselves and the kingdom of God. As the concentration increases, the sound will become more tasteful and sweet. Therefore, the first necessity is repetition, without which concentration cannot take place. And unless concentration has become so intense as to enable the soul and mind to cross the stars, the sun, and the moon, the sound current cannot lift the soul. Do not think that you are stupid or unfit. The preliminary stages in Sant Mat are difficult, but when they are traversed and the mind goes up, then meditation begins to yield pleasure, so much so that one is unable to give up. The numbness of the lower extremities of the body is a good sign. Before rising from your meditation, you should pause and massage your limbs. The whole body, up to the eyes, should feel benumbed as a result of the concentration. In the beginning, any sound that you catch, whether of bell or chirping of sparrows and the like, should be caught. As the concentration increases, the sound will clear up into the bell. Repetition is the foremost necessity. Try to repeat in bed before going to sleep, and do repetition when you get up from sleep. All the sages have laid stress on the point that unless one dies during life, he cannot go in. This means that one should, by means of concentration, try to make his body numb up to the eyes. When one feels tired in body and mind after the day's work, it is best to ease the mind and body by doing repetition in a solitary room. The 1 hour devoted by you to repetition is not enough. You should pinch out 1 more hour from your daily work so as to devote 1.5 to repetition and half an hour to hearing the sound. If you cannot see light within, then you should fix your attention on the darkness and keep peeping into it. The darkness will change into light. Do not be anxious. When you give greater time to meditation, you will succeed. Spiritual progress does not depend on length of time after initiation. It depends upon concentration. You bring in the attention, and the mind is running out again. Sometimes you may succeed, and sometimes, oftener, the mind succeeds. Therefore, patiently and determinedly, enter the arena daily and stick to the focus. As the scattered attention collects in the focus, the mind narrows down its sphere of run, calms down, and begins to be withdrawn from the extremities of the body. As the practice advances, one becomes unconscious of the extremities, feet, calves, thighs, and upwards. On discontinuing the practice, one feels the attention slowly returning to the extremities. It is a slow process. The whole attention is to be taken within the focal center. When the attention is in the focus, we are unconscious of the body, but we are conscious of the focus and what there is inside of the focus. When the struggle has been carried on for some time, and you feel the change from repetition necessary, then sit in the position for hearing the sound current, but still stick to the focus and do not go after the sound. We catch it from the ear because we have the habit of hearing through the ear, but the sound that we are after does not come from the ear, nor is our ear the organ to hear it. It comes from above the focus. The attention, surat, hears it. There are 10 different sounds here. We are to catch the bell sound. If the bell is not heard, catch the shrill whistle, and failing that, catch the sort of noise like that of a railway train passing on a bridge. As the attention goes inside the focus, the different sounds become distinct, and the bell will be audible. Do not go after the sound. If one goes after the sound, the attention scatters in trying to catch it. Here again, you will find that there is a struggle. Part of the attention is catching the sound, while that which is still in the physical body is sometimes narrowing towards the focus, causing strain or pain in the calves or some point in the spinal cord where it is held, and sometimes causes disturbances by communicating outward sensations. The strain or pain that has been mentioned above should be borne. This is the equilibrium of outward and inward tendencies of the mind. It is not the type of strain or pain that will leave any ill effects on the body. The best way to succeed in this state of equilibrium is to look into the focus and not to let the attention slip down. It is the attention that feels the strain or pain, and if, instead of giving attention to this part of the body, one ignores it and engages the attention in the focus, the strain or pain will disappear, and the residual attention will have been pulled up a step. If you do not stick to the focus but let the attention slip down, the strain or pain will disappear also, but the attention is now outward, and the game is lost. However, by daily practice, we are to elevate this point of equilibrium. This point determines how far we have succeeded in withdrawing our attention from the body. So long as the whole attention does not go within, it will not stay within. When it has established connection with the master within, it is completely within. Below this state, it hears the sound, but these sounds do not pull it up. Or, in other words, the scattering tendencies of the attention do not allow it to catch the sound fully. The bell sound that pulls or attracts like a magnet commences from the 8-petaled lotus. The tables are turned now. The attention that had found it so difficult to go within now finds it difficult to stay out. To talk of the joys of staying within is the privilege of a different set of people. Only he can appreciate this state who has gone within, in the eye focus. Meditation is the process of exploring the source of one's consciousness throughout its manifold manifestations. This is similar to a bubble upon an ocean seeking the source from which it arises. The science of going within. The ultimate value of life depends upon awareness and the power of contemplation rather than upon mere survival. Aristotle. The Science of Going Within. Exploring the neurobiological basis of Shabda Yoga meditation. According to adepts and serious students of Shabda Yoga, one of the first signs that the meditation technique is working is the distinct feeling of numbness in the lower extremities. This is coupled with a sense of conscious withdrawal, where one oftentimes intuits that something profound is about to occur, such as entry into a new and luminous state of awareness. The intriguing question, at least from a neurobiological perspective, is to pinpoint biochemically what is happening during this first stage of meditation. It appears that the same chemicals that keep your body relatively still while asleep and dreaming, where one might be surfing, jumping, or flying, with arms and legs moving about in all sorts of rotations, may also be activated in deeper stages of meditation. The fundamental difference being that in dreaming, one is usually unconscious of such chemical interferences, whereas in Shabda Yoga, one consciously feels the onslaught of these chemicals becoming operative. In a breakthrough study, two Canadian neuroscientists, Patricia Brooks and John Peever, located two neurotransmitters which inhibit bodily movement when dreaming. As reported in the Journal of Neuroscience's press release, during REM sleep, the deep sleep where most recalled dreams occur, muscles that move the eyes and those involved in breathing continue to move, but most of the body's other muscles are stopped, potentially to prevent injury. In a series of experiments, University of Toronto neuroscientists Patricia L. Brooks and John H. Peever, Ph.D., found that the neurotransmitters gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, and glycine caused REM sleep paralysis in rats by switching off the specialized cells in the brain that allow muscles to be active. This finding reversed earlier beliefs that glycine was a lone inhibitor of these motor neurons. Interestingly, sleep paralysis, where one feels incapable of moving their body during sleep, which is on occasion accompanied by nightmares or visions, may offer a tantalizing clue to what may be transpiring during the first significant stages of Shabda Yoga meditation. Sleep paralysis is a transcultural phenomenon and can be either a chronic condition where one's sleep patterns can be dramatically impacted or occur in only isolated and rare episodes. Sleep paralysis can range from 1 minute to an hour. A number of theories have been proposed to explain why it occurs, but it appears that such disruptive sleep patterns are directly correlated to a disjunction between REM and wakefulness, where an erstwhile smooth transition between such states is somehow damaged or altered. Shabda Yoga is a relatively simple technique, arguably dating back to the pre-Vedic period in India, which is designed to induce a conscious out-of-body experience that is facilitated by a threefold method of constant repetition of certain words, listening to internal subtle sounds, and focusing on inner lights. As Charan Singh, the late spiritual master at Radha Swami Satsang Bias, explains, the electric current or battery charge you feel is the withdrawal of the spirit currents from the body. This will gradually change to numbness of the body and travel upward. Please do not become frightened over this withdrawal of the soul current from the body. Shabda yogis in general, however, have not tried to correlate their inner journeys with a deeper neurobiological understanding, since their practice has been intertwined for centuries with a Gnostic-like theology where the body and the spirit are viewed as distinct entities. However, if Shabda Yoga meditation is indeed a neurobiological process, then there should be telltale signs of such that can be quantified by accurately measuring the levels of neurotransmitters such as gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine in the brain, while one is feeling the sensation of conscious paralysis while meditating. Indeed, one wonders if there are not chemical ways of inducing the same effect in non-meditators and seeing whether or not they report similar experiences as their Shabda Yoga counterparts. Our hypothesis is that Shabda Yoga practitioners who experience the onslaught of numbness in their extremities, which shouldn't be confused with paresthesia, the sensation that one feels when one's foot goes to sleep, during deep meditation, are experiencing a biochemical process that is similar to what happens when we are asleep and certain neurochemicals manifest to inhibit bodily movements. In other words, Shabda Yoga induces a conscious sleep paralysis of sorts. If this is correct, we should be able to ascertain whether or not gamma-aminobutyric acid and glycine levels are operative.